Okay, so good evening again. It is my utmost pleasure and honor to be able to welcome Mr. Kilian Kleinschmidt among us. Mr. Kleinschmidt is a humanitarian, well-known, world-known international networker, humanitarian and refugee expert with over 25 years of experience in the field of helping people in many, many countries, not only in Jordan, but in many countries and in many areas. He worked as, or his experience includes being UN official, aid worker, diplomat, founder of the Startup Innovation and Planning Agency, and many more. This is just the various things that I came with and I thought are worth sharing to show the scope of your work. And Mr. Kleinschmidt kindly agreed to participate in our educational seminar that I was talking about before the film. And the topic of his presentation, the title is From Charity to Dignity. And this is something that I would like to start with. I prepared a couple of questions for Mr. Kleinschmidt, and then we will give you a floor to be able to ask him. So my first question would be, why did we agree on this topic? From charity to dignity. What is your experience, not only from the Za'atari, but from other camps that you were working in?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much. And I'm amazed to see so many people here. And actually watching one of the great movies which have been made in Za'atari. Just to say this, and these guys, Chris and Zach, were just great. They were fun to work with. They're very good friends. We still work together on a number of projects. Now, I think you have all understood the message which they were giving. A message, this is about human beings, it's about people, and it's not about commodities. It's not about things. It's not about poor little things which you need to feed and support for the next 20 years. It's about human beings who are only in search of their dignity and frankly speaking, also to be recognized as individuals. And that is what I'm going to speak tomorrow about. It's, in fact, moving away from the charity, which is very, very arrogant, giving from up to down something to people, and actually continuing, creating dependency, moving away from treating people as human beings. As I like to say, when I look at a room like this one, there's probably now 100 people or so remaining. If I'm looking at you as the ones who built that camp initially in 2012, on the 29th of July 2012, that camp was built. If I'm looking at you as an aid worker who is solving problems in an emergency, I don't see your faces. I don't hear your names. You're becoming numbers. You're becoming logistics. You're becoming simply a mathematical and logistical exercise to me. I multiply you 100 times by 2,100 kilocalories. That's what you're going to get. I don't care what you like, what you don't like, what different people eat. I give you the same stuff every day for the next 20 years. Good luck. I divide you by 5, that's the number of tents you get. These beautiful UNHCR tents, $500 a piece, you're getting 1 for every 5 people. It doesn't matter whether you like the other people, but 5 get 1 tent. I multiply you by 18 liters of water. That's what you're supposed to get. I mean, how many of you have flushed today the toilet 5 times? I think everybody, 5 times. That's already your daily ration of water gone probably 3 times. So that's what I want to say, and it's very important to move from that idea. Poor people need charity, they need our help. No, they need recognition as human beings. That's what is for me very dear. And in the 21st century, I think, with due respect, we have to move away from care packages, which means nothing against the organization care, but I mean, still moving away from donating, from issuing things which make people dependent. We can do better. We are connected. We have the internet. We have the possibility in taking our phones and wiring money within seconds somewhere else in the world. We can talk to anybody in the world. Let's use that. There's much more than just building up storage facilities for people, which, by the way, is only 10% of the world's displaced are living in camps.
So my follow-up question would be, how do you do it? How do you move from charity to dignity?
So let's talk about this camp as an example. So what we did in there, why did the camp change? Why is it very different from that initial tents and rows, and then the tents are being replaced by containers? Why did we, what happened there? First of all, we set up everybody in the same way. We considered that everybody wanted to go to the toilet together, so they got communal toilets. 50, 60 people had to share one toilet. That's fun. So you were getting two toilets, one for the girls and one for the boys. Kitchen, there were communal kitchens to cook together. Showering together, and then you're allowed to clean it together because you're a community. Basically, I look at you and I say, oh, you're all from Bratislava, so you must be a community. Anybody knows each other here? I mean, but I'm treating you as a community. That's what happened there. And you know what these people did? Well, they dismantled all the public buildings. They stole 90 buildings while I was there. I was there from 2013 to 2014. 19 buildings disappeared. Like locusts, people were getting on there, 100 people or something, and dismantling the blocks of the public toilets. Vandalism, criminals. You know what they did with all these materials? They built their private toilets. They built their private showers. You have seen it, what they have been doing. So, in fact, what they did, they privatized public good and made out of this something which gave them the feeling back. I'm an individual. I'm a human being. I can lock a door. I can close the door. I'm somebody. I'm different from my neighbor. You don't know how important it becomes when you have been treated as a mass product. You know that when you're going somewhere and there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people, you feel like, I want to show how different I am. They wanted the same thing. So that's what they did. They stole everything. They even stole the police station. So, and then, of course, there was a lot of violence. Every time we tried to intervene, they were throwing stones, and then there was the police firing tear gas. I mean, it was really wild. And then recognizing this was the first step. I think the very first step in the change of paradigm of aid starts with, please stop to think rich people give to poor people. It's an exchange. It's being on the same level. It's talking to each other, seeing how we can actually create a win-win situation. And then what we did in here, recognizing as well, and other things like the electricity theft. Terrible. My bosses were telling me, you have to cut electricity. Because what happened was, there was the public lights. We installed public lights. So what they did, they said, well, there's electricity. So we put 2 wires, and then we also have electricity. So 14,000 households stole electricity, worth 500,000 euros a month. That is actually humanitarian money, because we UNHCR, we had to pay the bills. So moving away from seeing this as a theft, but again, understanding it created safety, it created social life, it created economy, and the Champs-Élysées in Za'atari today, with 3,500 shops in the market, having a monthly turnover of $15 million, I mean, it's really cool. So don't stop it. Don't cut off electricity, but manage electricity. And that's where we started saying, who can manage electricity? Can the NGOs manage electricity? No. Can somebody of us reorganize all that? No. So we went to actually talk to companies, we talked to cities, we partnered up with the city of Amsterdam. So the city of Amsterdam became our planning partner. How do you organize a city of 100,000 people? So these are very, very simple ways of actually moving away from a humanitarian logic and seeing of how would we do that. No, we wouldn't continue delivering water with a water truck for 100,000 people. We would put a water pipe. Would we deliver the water for free? No, we would put in a water meter and we would actually then begin to charge people. Why not? In the beginning, when I said, let's charge and make people responsible for what they're using in the camp, my colleagues were saying, but these are refugees. I said, so what? And in fact, it's part of being responsible and being part of a society is to even pay bills. And those who cannot pay bills, they get social welfare. Okay, this is how it works and should be working in a society, at least of how we have built up our capitalist societies, right? So that's why any difference? And again, remembering there's 100,000 people in the camp and 500,000 people in Jordan not in the camp who pay bills. So I think the biggest innovation is our own mindset, moving away. It's not something which we have to feed for the next 20 years. They can feed themselves very well. All what they need, and Chris and Zach were saying it, they need jobs, they need to be able to be integrated into the market. This is all what they want. Some people cannot. Yes, let's help them. That's social welfare, it's solidarity. But it has nothing to do with maintaining people in that state of dependency. The rest, yes, how do we do this? We have, as I said, we have the phones, we have the connectivity. You can bring in blockchain methods. You can bring in all sorts of new technologies. Yes, we have done it. We have started printing prosthetic hands with 3D printers, fab labs, startup, and so on and so forth. Education was a big issue here. Education, we're all saying, well, there are 400,000 children in the Middle East out of school. Yes, they're out of school. But please, again, schools in many countries are not helping kids actually to progress. They're there to maintain kids and support regimes and systems. So what is actually required in the modern world is to open up the thinking, to have people actually question and recognize there is something more. And I think we should see exile as an opportunity. We always look at exile as something horrible. We also need to look at exile as an opportunity for change. And people will change while they're away. That whole logic, yes, they will go back into their villages. Yes, they're talking about this in the movie. But in the end, many people will not. People are changing. They're urbanizing a camp, which is a city. People will change their minds. Provides incredible opportunities for girls. We had Malala also as a visitor. Girls would never go in some places to school. I've seen that in Pakistan, for instance, where little girls in a displaced camp were telling me, it's cool here. I'm going to school. I'm actually having friends. I'm getting out of my prison at home, basically. This is what they were saying. So let's stop looking at exile and displacement as something negative. Let's use that and let's look at it as something where we can all thrive and actually people to return with something more than a repatriation grant from UNHCR or IOM or somebody. There's something else which you can bring back.
Well, that's actually my follow-up question to that, because you mentioned it already. Camps are transforming into the towns, into the cities. What was originally well-intended and probably planned as temporary solution is now turning into long-term solution. We heard that on average people spend in camps 17 years, but then we know of the camps in Kenya, for example, where there is already the 4th generation being born in the camp. So you have 2-3 generations knowing just the camp. So is this the solution? What impact could it have on the inhabitants of the camps?
Well, when we discussed this a bit before, I mean, first of all, I started working with refugees in fleeing together with 20,000 people back in 1992 from southern Sudan at the time, into Kenya. We were attacked. The government forces moved on a camp inside of Sudan, and we ran. The 20,000 people became refugees, and I became a refugee helper, basically working with UNHCR from then onwards. That camp, which is called Kakuma, is still there. My son, who I made actually in that time, he went back as a young water engineer a couple of years ago into the camp Daddy was building in '92. At the time, I was putting the first little pegs into the ground, chasing away some local families and so on. There are over 200,000 people there now. And he said, Dad, but what is this nonsense? That there's still the same aid organization doing the same stupid water system which you have been building back in 1992 instead of having a proper water distribution system as you would have somewhere else. And now let's think about something. Yesterday, I came from 3 days in Venice. I worked. I swear I worked. I worked actually at the architectural department of the University of Venice, beautiful, and we went through the same discussions. You know what? Venice is a refugee city. It was built by refugees running away from us guys, from the barbarians. And they were building Venice. So it's a perfect example of a refugee city. Most of our cities have been coming out of some form of a camp, people then seeking protection around the church, the castle, the temple, something. So think about it. Migration, refuge, protection has built our urban centers. And suddenly we're making all this fuss. The other day I was in Berlin. I was walking back home to my hotel and I'm passing some excavation site, digging ancient things, and called the Fisherman's Island in the middle of Berlin. What was it? It was a refugee camp, which had become a refugee settlement of the Huguenots who were running away from, chased out of France ages ago. Did anybody do a status determination at the time? Did anybody sort of say, no, but when there is peace in France, you go back to France, or in Venice or somewhere? So I think we have somewhat, and this is now my honest criticism of what we have built, made it too complicated. People in history, as sad as it is, have always moved. Some tried to move back where they were chased away from. Others couldn't and never did. But we never kept them hostage to the situation. They moved on. They built new houses, built new families, built everything new. So in that sense, we have to move away from our logic, well, this is a camp and it will disappear. Let's use camps and the investment we're putting into these places as an investment into the place where they are. Let's take again Kenya. So we're having two very big camps in Kenya. Kakuma camp in northwestern Kenya and Dadaab camp in northeastern Kenya. There's over 500,000 people in these two camps, in the poorest regions of a very poor northern Kenya. And it's a massive economy which has been established. The only thing is that we humanitarians, we look only at the refugees and maybe a little bit around the camps. And the others who think, oh my God, how can I develop Kenya? How can I develop northeastern and northwestern Kenya? Don't see, in fact, there is an enormous capacity and an enormous opportunity to connect the dots. And yes, you suddenly have a business center up there. So I think we need to really move on, but also move away from having people kept hostage by a situation, being kept hostage. Now I will become very unpopular with my humanitarian friends, where I'm coming from, and saying hostage to the aid system and the aid logic. Let people move on. Let's not give up on rights. Let's not give up on human rights. Far from that. Let's not give up on the Refugee Convention. But let's people move on and have and allow them to settle properly wherever they are. And trust me, the more you're allowing people to do it, the more natural it will happen. Again, worldwide, most of the migrants and refugees who are on the move, people on the move by desperation, by persecution, are helped by other people. There is no aid reaching them anyway because the aid budgets are so tiny. So it's about people helping other people. Make governments responsible for that as well. Don't take away the responsibility. I don't think there will be more suffering. I think we need to move on mentally.
What is your experience with the host governments that they're hosting the vast numbers of refugees, like in Kenya, for example, Jordan? Do they react to these innovative ideas, or they would rather keep it as temporary solution, hoping that one day those thousands of people would move back home?
Well, they have learned the lesson, because we have always said yes, and then the preferred option is the return to the place of origin and so on. So mentally, they're, of course, temporary. Yes, refugees will go home. Refugee, go home as fast as possible. I've seen that in Kenya. Kenya has been several times saying, now it's finished. Everybody goes back to Somalia, everybody goes back to southern Sudan or wherever. And then realizing simply it's not possible. People will vote with their feet when it becomes possible, or will move on because they've changed. They're not village people anymore, suddenly they're urban people. So prospect of going back to the little village and have a camel in southern Somalia, no. They want to go to a city. That's what we have seen in Afghanistan and many other places as well. In Jordan was the same story. I remember when I had John Kerry visiting. It was an interesting moment. It was when the first poison gas attack had happened. And it was the famous Red Line, and the Americans were thinking whether they would start bombarding or not. Anyway, so in front of me I had John Kerry sitting, and I had the foreign minister of Jordan sitting. And here I was doing what I called my toy show, which I had a little toy collection, and I showed of how the camp would be developing and so on. And I was talking about the city. I was saying this is becoming a city. People treat it as a city, so we also will treat it as a city. So John Kerry thought it was absolutely cool and great and wonderful. And Nasser Judeh, the foreign minister of Jordan, he wanted to kick me out of the country. His bodyguards told me later. He was furious, totally furious. He said, this guy, but he couldn't, because already at the time the story which we were telling about this camp and the situation had changed. So governments, I think, will be gradually and should be understanding it cannot continue. I mean, aid has to change anyway, and that's what we have seen, what we think is the wave of people who came to Europe over the last couple of years. I think it's, by the way, great, because that was kicking, our asses, because it showed us that we were completely not aware of the real situation in the world. It showed us how weak our own societies are. It showed us in a way of how weak our understanding from Europe being the greatest peace project on earth are really. Just remember, this is the first time an entire generation will retire and actually die in peace, be born and die in peace in the history of Europe, the first time. It's amazing. Anyway, so these things totally forgotten, and because 1.5 million or 2 million people came to us, we suddenly realizing. And we realized it doesn't work out there to just give a little bit of peanuts in the world and sort of think, because I've given €5, some little poor African is now happy because he has his 2,100 calories for one day. No, it doesn't work anymore. People came to tell us, do you know what's going on out there? It doesn't work. So I think we're now in a change process, and I know it's difficult, and it's not everybody agrees, and we have the rise of populism and xenophobia, and people have wet dreams about fences and walls and things. But no, I think we will come back. I'm very positive we will come back to understand it's not about walls and fences. It's about managing migration. It's about managing our being together on one planet. And it's also exchanging the resources in a different way. We have invented everything. We have a solution for everything. And if we learn of how to change and make these resources available, and they don't only belong to us, but to everybody in the world, well, that world will be a bit better. It's not about charity.
Thank you. Now it's your turn before I pose more questions that I still have. So do you have anything to add or maybe dispute? Here? Maybe if you could, okay, we have mic, so you don't have to shout.
Thank you, Kilian. I'll stay with your first name
Sure.
because the last name is kind of complicated for me.
It's very easy. But
Right.
By the way, St. Kilian was a guy who came from Ireland to Germany. He was another migrant. And I mean, he was a missionary migrant. That's why we have the name Kilian in Germany.
Thank you very much for your really inspiring speech. I work for the Open Society Foundation here in the country, And one of the major concerns for us is the opening of the minds of the people, because of like historically we were kind of closed in our valleys and the way of, you know, we were oppressed people for 1,000 years. But the thing you touched upon was very interesting, the refugee camp and organizing it in a way of entrepreneurial kind of way. But if you have like 60,000 people coming in, you can probably just put material on the ground and say, hey guys, here are the toilets, beds, tents, and you manage it yourself because this is how we want to do it now. You have to come up through some kind of like early on, so like organizing it logistically, and then you can say, okay guys, now it's time that we move out a little bit and we let you be with your safety and hygiene and food supply yourself. So we will pay you as refugee camp people who actually stay there as refugees, but you can actually be teachers, you can be the safety workers, you can be hygiene workers. Is that possible? And so that's one part. When do you move on from helping the immediate need, 60,000 people coming in 60 miles from somewhere, and then how many months you can start doing this? This would be the first part. The second part, is there a way how to make governments actually, let's say, buy the production from places like this, or like from Jordan? Because that's what I think, in order to expand that economy, you would have to come up with some kind of a system like, okay, Slovakia, you take, I don't know, 50,000 or 500,000 worth of products from the camps, and here is the list of things we can do in the camp, and that's the way you can move the economy forward.
Yeah,
thank you.
Very interesting question. I mean, gosh, I can speak about an hour about these things. I won't, I promise you. Yeah, of course. I mean, there will be always situations where you need a fire brigade type thing and you're helping in an immediate emergency. I just went through an exercise with different European partners to think of what is happening to us if we have a big natural disaster or something. Same thing, camps, containers, etc., camp management. But, I mean, to move as fast as possible out of this and create responsibilities, I mean, that's very clear. There is one hitch, though. I mean, so I would also say, well, here's a piece of land, and, well, here are the materials, and let's work on that together and create some standards and things. And I think that would be the best relatively fast. I mean, just maybe on shelter even. I mean, we spent $100 million on shelter. I mean, with $100 million, we could have started building houses or something. I mean, totally different if we had moved into housing finance. And by the way, the Syrians were furious with us and with John Kerry and everybody, and saying, when the Iraqis came to Syria, we didn't put them in camps. We built them apartments. Yeah, I mean, there's different approaches, and I think in an overall economic sense, it would have been much more economic, yes, to build maybe not apartments, but little houses or something. So I think there are ways possible. I would say there is a need. I mean, you know, there is sort of the bushfire. It burns, and then people run away, and then they come back, and they rebuild or build or something. This is very short-lived crisis. Or when it rains in northern England or so, people get displaced, and 3 weeks later they're back home or something. But very fast you sense this is a conflict which becomes complex. And this is what happened here as well. 2011 it starts, 2012, well, it continues, the 3,000 people coming to Jordan every night, heavy, difficult. And then in 2013, when I came in March 2013, I mean, that's where people started realizing it's becoming really complicated. Then Hezbollah got into the conflict, and it really became messy out there in Syria. Suddenly the Free Syrian Army wasn't winning anymore, and so on. That's when you shift, for sure. You must shift gear. And you basically tell, this is my opinion, you tell the humanitarian actors, could you step aside a little bit? And then you develop the place as you would do a new settlement. I mean, I had a meeting with Chancellor Kern the other day. They said, just imagine this as Seestadt in Wien, which is a new area in Vienna. 20,000 housing units, basically, apartments, and 20,000 jobs. That's how you have to look at it. And Seestadt is not developed by UNHCR, I'm sorry. But it's developed by professionals. So I think we need to put in that sort of notion. It's not because you're a refugee, it's like a Jewish star or something, and you're branded the rest of your life. I mean, Einstein was a refugee, nobody told him this the whole day. So get away of this and say, well, there's now 100,000 people, they need housing, they need jobs, they need everything. Jordan has moved. It's a very interesting case. They've moved because through the so-called Jordan Compact, last year decided, Jordan agreed that up to 300,000 Syrians would be able to work, allowed to work, in special economic development zones. If there would be jobs created also for Jordanians, because it's an issue in the whole region, it's jobs. Forgetting that quite often labor was imported from other countries, from other continents even. Anyway, and there is a deal with the European Union to have 50 products from Jordan at preferential conditions being imported to the EU. So there is a deal there. It hasn't happened till now. Only 32,000 people, and I was in Jordan a few weeks ago, only 32,000 people got a work permit, which is regrettable. But I mean, definitely, moving in the direction of allowing work, production, but that is only possible if, again, we're changing away from having this situation being under the responsibility of the humanitarian sector. We should, the different agencies and so on, UNHCR, IRC and so on, some consultative, some technical assistance, but the rest is about service provision, it's about infrastructure, it's about, again, assisting those who are between the cracks, the female-headed households, the people who cannot work, who have no income, social protection, rather than, and that for local people and newcomers alike. That's as it should be here and everywhere else. Let's use additional people as a trigger for change, as a trigger for investment. There's actually an initiative for Europe currently by Mrs. Gesine Spahn, who was a presidential candidate in Germany. She's trying to set up a fund, a European fund, to help municipalities who have received more newcomers than others, and invest in social cohesion, invest in infrastructure, and invest in services. But I think, again, the main thing is it's not because you have been displaced by force, you belong to the humanitarian sector for the rest of your life until you return. It doesn't work like that.
Some more questions, comments here?
Thanks. I would like to ask, how would you change the mindset of the people in Europe? Because I think this is one of the biggest issues right now, that people do not accept it. And when they will not include these people in their own lives and they will not understand that this is important, we will have a big issue in Europe, and we already are having it. So what do you think should we do to make them understand? Because at this point, people are starting to be very defensive, and it's getting worse, not better, when you're trying to explain how this works.
Okay, I think we need to move away. We get to the facts and figures. And it's very useful also for me sometimes to get back to what is the state of migration in the world. There are no more migrants and people on the move today than 10 years ago, basically. It has shifted a bit. There's 21.5 million people displaced as falling in principle under the Refugee Convention. The rest is in different other forms on the move. It's 250 million people roughly on the move and are counted as migrants as we speak. It hasn't changed. So it's a fact. The people who came this year to Italy, you have the feeling these are hordes of wild people coming and so on. You know what this represents? One soccer stadium. One big match in a big stadium. 80,000 people. 85,000 people. That's what you put into the Olympic Stadium in whatever, in Berlin or so. I mean, it's nothing. In the same time, hundreds of thousands of people have settled legally inside of Europe. So I think facts and figures is number one, which is very, very important. Of course, getting back also to our own history as migrants and refugees and so on is very helpful. And this is not some leftist propaganda. I mean, we are built out of migration. My grandmother was a refugee coming from Strasbourg to Germany in the First World War. Everybody here in this room has a migration history and story at some point in the family. So let's remember that. Let's remember. I mean, recently I had a radio interview, and somebody calls me and says, "Mr. Kleinschmidt, how can we prevent these niggers to make so many babies?" I said, you know, I mean, remember 150 years ago, 120 years ago, 100 years ago, we also had 7, 8 babies in each family. And you know what? We also migrated like crazy on ships across the ocean to other places. So, I mean, the answers are pretty simple, in fact, when you can concentrate on the facts and figures. When you remember that solidarity has always been part of the world's shifting populations. That in all of us there is an Arab. Sorry. I gave an interview some time back and I said, we're all coming from Lucy. Big panic. Yes, we are. Our origins are in Africa, guys. But I understand that we have a very, very big issue with people who try to build up on that what is perceived as a big threat. And I mean, I'm a migrant, I'm a luxury migrant next door in Vienna. Yeah? And I mean, I'm convinced the Austrians have a big complex with the Turks are standing again in front of the city or something. I think we need to very clearly also differentiate. Migration is one. The multicultural, the mix of religions, our relationship as primarily Christians with Islam and so on, this is something totally different. That's what I also told the Chancellor in Austria. I said, sorry, I mean, we need to stop mixing these two issues. It's totally different. We need migration. I was this morning in Vienna in the Hofburg in a conference about local communities. Man, I mean, if you look into the figures, we will collapse if we don't have migration. I mean, we have a total deficit from Russia to everywhere, a total deficit, and I think it was an IOM colleague who was coming up with all these scary statistics. So when some people say, yeah, but we don't want them, we don't need, and so on, well, then make babies, stop birth control, get your migrants back from wherever in the world. I mean, this is the only answer you can give. But anyway, our business model will collapse. Our capitalist business model will collapse if we don't have more people, full stop. And so I think there is a lot to do in the narrative about migration, absolutely necessary. Yes, we all agree, and we need to find also things where, I mean, points where we all agree. Yes, we all agree, we don't want smugglers, we don't want criminals, we don't want to continue to feed the systems. I mean, when we look into the current smuggling networks in Africa, I mean, it's an income-generating project for many out there. Have we really thought about this? I mean, how can we stop that and replace it with legal pathways, with legal ways of coming? Migration partnerships, you name it. I mean, there's so many different ways of which have already been invented and researched. We have the menu of answers to get rid of this panic which is created sometimes, I think, deliberately to avoid that we have a sound relationship with migration coming. I think Canada remains, again, one of the examples. Yes, some will say, well, they're selecting the people. Yes, why not? But they're taking pressure out of certain places. They're taking pressure, so why we're not targeting certain communities where a lot of people are moving? I worked last year as an advisor to the German Minister for Development. We have to eradicate the root causes of displacement, so let's do development in the poor places. Sorry, I mean, the richer people get, the more they migrate. It's also a fact. So, I mean, thinking that, but in contrary, we should be happy about this. The more people getting into a pool of migration who moves according to demand, supply, that's the capitalist way of looking at it, but also move as global citizens, I mean, the better. Let's be happy. There are 220 million tourists coming to Europe every year. 220 million something. Chinese, Russians, Indians, God knows what. Americans. Yeah, now they need a visa, that's good. So 220 million, and we're getting scared of 80,000 now having come so far to Italy. I'm sorry. And we can solve that. It shouldn't be unsolvable. And so I think the first thing is manage migration rather than be passive about it.
Thank you. We still have a couple of minutes, so let's use them. Okay.
Don't be scared.
So I have the last question, if I may, because I don't see any hand raised. Okay. Well, the other video was also about how common people can help, coming back to people in need, because whatever we say about them, their empowerment, etc., at least in the first phase, they need assistance, they need help, because very often, now I'm talking about forced migrants, or as you nicely put it, usually desperate migrants. So certainly in the first phase, they need empowerment, they need assistance, they need help. So what do you think, what is a realistic way for ordinary people, individuals, how to help? Would what the filmmakers were promoting, would it help, or are there other ways how we can help? Well, each of us in our community, in our work, our positions.
Well, I mean, obviously, it starts at home. I mean, that's one thing I'm saying. I say I've failed in my message if anybody asks me, so how can I become a volunteer in the refugee camp? So don't ask me how to get to that refugee camp. They don't need you there. Honestly, it's okay. However, working back in your community, in your environment, becoming an ambassador, a messenger for another message, and especially in this current environment of restriction and the believers into warships and islands, and I mean, I live in a country where they believe very strongly in this currently, and you're here as well. So you become advocates for an open world. That's the best thing you can do. Hold back, be strong, don't shut up. Secondly, I'm saying I'm failing if anybody now gets on a truck full of old clothes and drives to Greece and says, I'm helping people. Please don't do this. There are more clever ways to do it. So there are actually, I mean, part of the, let's say, the tech movement and, again, connectivity. So, for instance, we're testing currently with a partner organization of mine called Needs List. We're testing the virtual container. So instead of having in-kind donations of things which you're collecting here, putting them, and then with a high cost bringing there, and then people don't need it, you can actually do an online shopping and fill a shopping cart of people, I mean, what people really ordered and what people really need. It's a virtual container through Needs List. At the same time, of course, there are ways of having your institutions, everybody works somewhere, contribute. I mean, a great initiative, and it's very successful, is Chiron University, for instance. Chiron University is an online university for students, for refugee students all over the world. So a lot of universities are contributing. I mean, these are things, invest in organizations and projects which actually become really sustainable, which supports, and there's nothing wrong in this. I have shifted. Everything I do is for profit. Yeah, everything I do has actually a business case in it. Also, Mr. Soros has launched a big fund and saying, well, who is investing in migration? It should not be just a donation thing. So there's lots of very clever social entrepreneurs out there. I'll give you an example of great projects. I just was in Stockholm last week, meeting with a young social entrepreneur from Addis Ababa. She is training girls on coding, programming. There's currently a need of 3.5 million coders in the world. Of course, you can invest in there. You can actually even ask that you get one day the money back. It's the same, a friend of mine in Amman, in Jordan, it's called rbk.com, Reboot Camp. They're training coders in 4 months, from zero to job, as they say, from zero to hero in 4 months. Yes, it's, well, for profit in the sense that he wants to see the money back from the people who actually got a job. Out of each 40, about 30 survive 15 hours of learning a day, which starts with yoga, with meditation, and so on. These 30 who managed to survive 4 months of intense training all get jobs between 1,000 and 3,000 euros a month. That is investment, and that, of course, has a multiplying effect. So there's a lot of this happening, which is entrepreneurship, which is moving people out of dependency. And that is what we all need to make more visible. So that's what I'm doing now with my project, which is called Switchboard, which basically connects. We're building now the platform for that connectivity between resources, meaning money, tech, know-how, and opportunities. So we're even moving in a direction of having people being able to invest in certain areas with a return on investments through small and medium enterprise loans, etc. You do much more good than donating money to something which just flows away.
Thank you very much. I have many more questions, but unfortunately we have to finish. So, and I'm sure that you will be able to come up with more questions afterwards, but it will be too late, unfortunately. So thank you very much, Mr. Kleinschmidt, for joining us and for sharing your ideas and your experience with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I thank also all of you for spending time with us, for joining us for this event. I hope it was interesting for you and you had a nice evening. I certainly did. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the evening. Good night.